the reason I have you here currently, is because, we're in a period of time with a deluge of terrible news. And I have a problem communicating without making it like really downer. So I'm including you because you're like a bright shining ray of light in this very dark topic we're going to be discussing. And I think it's something that is close to both of us. I do want to start with like a bit of an icebreaker. So how are you? How are you doing? Let's do
I'm
like
doing good,
what's a
man.
bright spot right now for you?
The bright spot is I just quit my job and I'm about to do some international traveling with my wife, so that's some good stuff happening. And yeah, and really working with a lot of wonderful people recently in terms of coaching. And it's always nice to work with people, but I think a lot of the times it's nice to get like a new wave of clients after you graduate a bunch of them, and then so right now I'm in the phase of intaking a lot of new people, and always refreshing when that happens.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed you're getting more people actually commenting in your videos than like I've seen the last like year or so. So that's cool. That's cool to see that starting to happen. And yeah, when I saw you
Yeah, I
making
love
those
the
announcements, I was all like, wow, um, Billy is like entering a new stage of his life. I'm sort of entering a new stage in my life with my wife's career is starting to really develop. She's a preschool paraprofessional, but she's like getting a lot more in with the school district. Last year it was like a complicated situation where she was like in a hostile work environment, but all of that's like changed now. So it's like it's all looking up there. But at the same time, like I've been very interested in politics since 2022. Beforehand, I was a conspiracy theorist, just completely unhealthy lines of thinking, uh, held numerous beliefs that I'm completely embarrassed by, but also that have sort of become like political mainstream now. So, like, it's like I'm regularly confronted with one thing or another that, like, I used to believe, but then I realized was sort of like bullshit. And then I'm seeing other people start to believe now. I'm just like, it's bullshit. Calm down. No, no, no. And so like that's sort of like a complicated thing that I've been wrestling with, but there's like some topics that I've never been reactionary about, and I think most people aren't reactionary about, and that's like that's specifically what we're going to be talking about today, and that's LGBTQ stuff. Sexual orientation is usually like I've met very few people in my life that are just like outright bigots towards like people with different sexual orientations. That being said, it's structurally like a like looked down upon, laws against it, especially even like when I was younger, it was before marriage equality. So like we're like in the middle of like a fluctuating period, and well, in that fluctuating period, we've hit a point where we're in a bit of a backslide. Anything you want to add there before I get into the sources?
No, but like you said, I think that what how you described it is really accurate. And in terms of, I think it's always beneficial to kind of take the experiences that we are observing right now and compare it to the natural physical world. And the backwash is like the exact right term, right? When every day, and the following the moon cycle, we have a water coming in, high tide, and then low tide, and high tide and low tide, right? And every time water comes in, but then for it to come in again, it needs to go back a little bit. And then over time, it goes in and then it becomes higher and higher. But then once it's reached its peak, it tends to go down and down and down. But it seems like it's a repetition of that, but over the iterations of that, months and years, that's how like the shorelines form, right?
Right.
And so we are collectively forming the shoreline of our, collective understanding and definition of what is it really, what does being LGBTQ mean, right? Like, because just a few, decades ago, people thought that being gay was a choice, but we now are like, whoa, it turns out it's not. And then I think the major discourse right now is like, is being trans a choice or not? But so far, like, I think there's less, I think, collective support around, trans being something that you are, instead of like, no. And some people argue like, no, it's like a mental illness, so you need to treat it as such. And you have people on the other side, it's like, no, it's not. But like, there's not a lot of like a conclusive physical evidence that ties it to like, no, it's how you're born, or it's not. Right. So because of that, we're in this era of fluctuating belief systems, and that's how we're gonna, open this, these articles up.
Yeah, and that's it. That I think that's absolutely it. Is it's well, I mean, this is something we kind of like brushed on the very first time we spoke. Is like there's a call and response to history, especially when it comes to progress, and I just think it's like really it's hard to be in a time where you do see the backslide. And what's interesting about the whole philosophy behind excluding people in these ways is by finding a sort of like a reason why it can't work, as opposed to like accepting that it is and working with it, So like with gays, it was also viewed as a mental disorder or disability type of thing back during like the AIDS epidemic, and that was like a lot of the time it was just literally people being accused of like just general debaucherous behavior, and that's where it is now, except we're in a period where we have made progress, so you don't hear that much about gay people anymore. But if the slide back is far enough, we might start hearing those things again. And so the first thing I want to bring up is this, the Trump administration shuts down LGBTQ youth suicide hotline. This happened about a week ago. Well, this article was written about a week ago. This happened, I think, last month is when they announced it, but I'm going to read just a couple paragraphs from this. So, the Trump administration on Thursday afternoon officially terminated the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline's LGBTQ Youth Specialized Services Program, which gave callers under age 25 the option to speak with LGBTQ trained counselors. The announcement that the specialized service would be shuttered was made last month by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. The agency said it would no longer silo LGBT plus youth services, notably removing the T representing the transgender community, and would instead focus on serving all help seekers. So just pointing out right here, like we see it already. So it's a whole attack on LGBTQ people as a whole, but we also see specifically where they're excluding trans people an extra amount because they know that this is like a wedge point for them. Everyone who contacts the 988 Lifeline will continue to receive access to skilled, caring, culturally competent crisis counselors who can help with suicidal, substance misuse, or mental health crises, or any kind of emotional distress. Anyone who calls the Lifeline will continue to receive compassion and help, agency stated at the time. And we're seeing this a lot where there's like very... Like, I hate to be the guy who's like referencing George Orwell anytime a government agent speaks, but we're in a time where like double speak is like actually being employed like strategically by these hijacked government organizations. And so like when we hear a statement like that, we have to like really be critical of it. And like even when they say stuff like culturally competent crisis counselors, they mean people that agree with their politics. Like they're most likely going to replace a lot of the people working at like 988 and stuff like that with people who are more sympathetic to not just conservative ideas, because a lot of it isn't conservatism, it's just fascism, but also Christian nationalist ideas, which is really tied into this whole gay panic thing. Which, as an aside, I find bananas, because most people aren't Christian nationalists, and seems to just be a big overtaking by a minority in this country. But whatever. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline launched in July 2022, 2 years after President Donald Trump signed the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act, making 988 the universal number for the National Suicide Prevention Line. The bipartisan legislation noted that LGBTQ youths are 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide than their peers, and stated that SAMHSA must be equipped to provide specialized resources to high-risk populations. So then they rolled out an October of that year. They did a pilot program for the LGBTQ hotline. It costs $30 million annually to run, and they shut it down. Their excuse for doing so is basically, it says towards the end of the article that the Press 3 option had run out of congressionally directed funding, and added that continued operation of the specialized service would have required reallocating funds away from the main 988 hotline lifeline, possibly resulting in a massive reduction in service. And then there's just one more part I wanted to point out on here too. The option for 988 callers to press 1 if there are veterans or service members seeking specialized services will remain in operation. So that sort of belies their whole, we don't want to silo LGBT people off into one part of the suicide hotline, while they also keep the number 1 for veterans. You got anything to add about that article?
Yeah, so this is a very big thing, because personally to me, because I work with a nonprofit specifically for LGBTQ teenagers in Hawaii, in the state of Hawaii. And because I work with them, I keep up to date with especially the news that impacts teenagers, right? And so this is really disappointing, and because there's yes, of course, you could technically still get the same level of service. Yes, technically, you still have, you can rely on your community and things like that. You don't need the federal government involved in anything. Yeah, so technically, it is that way. But like you're saying, this is basically sending a message, right? About, hey, like, who is welcome in our, the society that we are building, and who is not welcome in the society that we are building. But I think the really tragic part is, just because there is an option 1, like, are we really good to our veterans and service members? Like, we say that, like, hey, thanks for your service all the time, but then, like, looking at the mental health for the veterans, it's not really in an ideal state by any means, I think. And another thing that I got to learn from my peers working at these nonprofits is that being the operator and the counselor on these hotlines is really taxing. So, like you mentioned, them being replaced, and then it's like the waves and waves of federal employees getting laid off in the earlier months of this year, right? And these are people, especially in the national parks and everything, these are people who really loved doing their jobs, and they had a lot of meaning into them. And then to have their funding cut away and their place of employment going away, and then to be replaced by something, I think that's a really tragic part. So on one end, right, it seems like this only impacts the teenagers, but really this is impacting the entire ecosystem, or like the feedback mechanism of how LGBTQ teenagers and people who work with them are expected to function in this society.
Right.
So the thing is, prior to this, they relied on federal funding, but now federal funding for it and the federal support for it is going away. And important thing now is to understand that this is happening because, again, coming to the natural metaphors, like you have a plastic bag, and then the more pressure you put on it, like the weakest part's gonna burst, right? And but the thing is, sometimes society is willing to move forward with that high pressure, even if there are a few leaks, because the leaks are deemed to be okay. And that's the hard part, because these are minorities we are dealing with, right? But in an ecosystem, every individual, every component, every species plays a role.
Right.
And so we have to, for those of us who are in the majority but understand the minority's role, it's now like, this is I think if we were to turn it into like a positive thing, this is an opportunity for us to recognize that the things that we took for granted may not be for granted. And the things that we want to protect, we have to take proactive measures into protecting.
Right.
And so that's, I think, of course, it's a pretty depressing news, especially when you get to talk to the teenagers who benefit from these services. And having to think about the, alternative possibility, which is like, I don't think people really, well, I'll perhaps touch on this a little bit later, but the impact of suicide, I don't think a lot of people really fathom it, because it's like looking at a, car cast. You don't really want to look at it, you just
Right.
want to kind of like rubberneck it, but you don't want to actively study like a car cast. But that kind of, I think we're slowly approaching the times where we can't afford to not look. And how will we turn this into an opportunity? And like, like Hawaii, there was no service like this, but Hawaii is a little bit more well equipped than other states, I think, because it's a pretty self-contained island. And the nonprofit I work with, Spill the Tea Cafe, is doing an excellent job at serving the teenagers. And so maybe this is a time for other states to kind of like up their game in, state level support, or like a municipal level of support, or community driven support. And, there are ways of looking at it like that as well.
Yeah, and I totally agree with all of that. And especially like, okay, so a lot of people did benefit from it. So I kind of skipped it in the article, but 1.5 million people called it since it was initiated in October 2022. That's a lot, especially considering it's a minority of people. But the other thing, that we all exist in an ecosystem, and not only that, but that ecosystem, the people ecosystem, it has such a diversity within like small clans. So when we attack gay people or LGBTQ people in general, when we attack trans people, we are attacking people in our community too, and when we cause people to commit suicide, we are causing our family members to commit suicide. And that it reverberates. Suicide by gunshot is one of the highest killers of kids in the country. And it just basing it off of the statistics there, that is disproportionately LGBTQ people. So yeah, it's about sending a message that the government, the state, isn't willing to support you anymore, at least on any type of like social cohesion level. If you're going to be a part of society, you're going to have to figure it out yourself, is their message. But luckily we do have community, we do have each other. But I do want to swing back to the proactivity part. So this is a time like where a lot of people are going to be reminded of past need for massive civil unrest. And it isn't necessarily just in the form of street protest. It's in the form of like disobeying the government when they act immorally, just in all stages, even when it comes to us having this conversation. They would prefer we didn't, so that's why it's vital that we do. But a conversation a lot of people didn't want to have last year was about Project 2025. And so I have an article here just from September of last year about Project 2025 for the LGBTQ community. And so, quick rundown. There's a conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation. One of the leaders of the Heritage Foundation was the OBM deputy during the last Trump administration, proved himself to be a loyalist, helped write Project 2025, and was elected to be was assigned by Trump, appointed to be the OBM director this time around. His name is Russell Vogt. He's also the guy who came up with the whole firing federal workers thing on all levels. There's a quote out there where he's saying we have to traumatize federal workers. That's exactly what they're doing. But if we look at this article from September that's discussing sort of the policy goals of the Heritage Foundation, we can actually see a couple of the points where they've already started enacting some of these policy prescriptions. So towards the middle of the article, it says, if implemented, Project 2025 would dismantle anti-discrimination protections by removing terms such as sexual orientation and gender identity from federal laws, allowing for legal discrimination against LGBTQ individuals. This hasn't necessarily started happening yet, but they are removing sexual orientation and gender identity from all federal paperwork. It's not like a government term currently, like they're using different like conservative terminology now. And in fact, like if it's kind of funny because if you look into it, they do like mass banning of words, so they end up like firing people who are like part of something important, because turns out like expressive isn't just used in woke like social science terms. It's also like a science word. But another part of the article says the plan further seeks to block access to health care for transgender individuals, particularly through Medicare and Medicaid, and it would reinstate the ban on transgender people serving in the military. Project 2025 also opposes federal support for LGBTQ equality initiatives abroad, advocating for a rollback of policies that promote inclusivity in other nations. So we've already seen them do a couple of these things. They have the Supreme, and we're going to sort of skim through an article about this, but the Supreme Court has already sided against making it a civil rights issue to ban transgender care for minors. That was a couple weeks ago, maybe. It was Monday, the 7th of July, where they made that decision. But also the reinstating the ban for trans people in the military. That's one of the very first things that they did. So we are seeing this start to pile up, some of these policies prescriptions that they had in mind. Yeah. Anything to add for that one?
Yeah, I think so. Like you noted, right? Many of the ideas and the plans inside Project 2025 is reactionary to the things and the policies that were done in a more progressive government, right?
Right.
So it's just not pronounced like Project 25, Project 2025, but even those progressive policies were the output of like progressive think tanks, right? Because that's sort of how politics run in America. But I think the bigger picture that we all are missing, both in terms of individual level and as a collective, is this idea that we can't really advocate for a singular good and expect it to be a holistic good. So what I mean by that is, you know, when I eat sugar, man, feels fucking amazing, right? And you know, when I eat a lot of carbs, I don't know, man, must be the Korean in me, but I love carbs. But you know, it just because if I keep doing that, diabetes central, right? Like I'm gonna induce type 2 diabetes onto myself. But the thing is, to my tongue, it was a good experience, right? To my tongue, it was like really beneficial, but it turns out it really wasn't. So, porn addiction, great for the penis, feels amazing, but it rots away your brain. So, like a lot of things we do that we think is good tends to be singularly good for a single organ in our body. So this is, my wife says this all the time. So the dentist tells me to take painkillers, but then the gastroenterologist says don't take too many painkillers. So what am I supposed to do? So all the doctors are only thinking about their parts, right? And then so they don't know what they should do in a collective way. But now put that into a society, right? We think if we have consensus, which technically what a majority is, that everything's going to be good. But it's not necessarily going to be holistically good because you're still unilaterally pushing for one idea of good. So we have to kind of like think about it like this. When I play basketball, right? Missing the shots is basketball, right?
Right.
It just making the goals and counting that as basketball, then that's a very flawed definition of what basketball is. Basketball is fumbling. Basketball is foul. Basketball is not making the free throw. Basketball is doing like a half court, Curry shot. Basketball is all of those things. So just like that, we have to understand, like a society, it's not, we can't make a good society simply on agreement. A good harmonious society actually is achieved through harmony and discord. We have to be able to disagree and come to a reasonable agreement for the collective good. And that is, I think, a perspective that so many of us are missing, because now, suppose the administration changes, right? What's likely going to happen? We're going to roll back everything again. And then what's going to happen again? It's going to be rolled back again and again and again and again. And like I said before, the shoreline shapes like that. But okay, if it didn't come at the cost of people, I think that's fine. What am I going to eat for today? Like, should I have mushroom salad or should I have congee? I don't know. But that's not really that important in the, long scale of me. But these fluctuations come at the cost of lives. And we think it's just like person dying, but when a parent experiences the death of a child, and when a family member, when the siblings experience the death of a sibling, it tends to really warp their life experience. And it's very likely that they can't really be fully functioning society members like they used to be before.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have the right resources to kind of like account for these, like collective downfall. And, man, that costs a lot of money. Funeral service and taking care of all the paperwork and doing the, law stuff and the, next of kin and, sending, dealing with the school and then dealing with the paperwork and like file for death certificate and blah, blah, blah. Man, it costs a lot of money. And so the economic cost of money, the economic cost of like the, recovering from familial trauma and the, cost of a community, like Texas unfortunately experienced a lot of deaths in there, like with the heavy flood, right? qualitatively, yeah, it may seem different, but then it's like it's the same death of a child. There's no way it's going to be like a okay. And I think developing a more comprehensive view of unity that is based on both harmony and discord. That's something that we really need to start thinking about. Basketball isn't just shots that go in. That's like North Korean style basketball. I can say this because I'm a Korean. You know, that's not the point of basketball at all. The point of basketball is to rub elbows and tackle, get fouled, and then not make the shot, not make the shot for 5 games, and then make a game-winning shot, feeling good about it. That's what basketball is about, right? And unity achieved through agreement and disagreement. I think that is the true unity that people are really missing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wish it was as simple as just being like, well, it's a push in the other direction and we'll push back soon. Because it does cost people's lives. And, there's no determining when it slides forward or backwards, there's no determining how far that goes either way. So, and like they are part of a natural force, we are too, so yeah, there's all of that going on. And yeah, I wonder if I need to, I'm trying to think of anything I might have wanted to say for the last part. Yeah, I think that maybe this, like, if I'm looking at a bright side of this, maybe finally Americans in general will start to see that politics matter. We'll see that the people who are the most like ferocious about politics around them are sort of controlling their lives to a degree that maybe they're not comfortable with. That's how the masses fought back against this kind of stuff at one point in time. And then we were put in a rather comfortable situation where people could generally look away from the corpse, So now that we have to be faced with it again, I think that it could cause more people to react, more popular movements. And that is a good thing. Especially because although there are, left-wing think tanks, there unfortunately aren't many think tanks representing a collective populist movement of the wider poor, like a la MLK type of deal. Their think tanks usually are, have money behind them. And, there are people with money that think that a cordant society that is organized is a good thing, and there are people with money that think that exercising extreme control is the way to sort of enforce their rule or prestige in society. So I do have a couple articles that I'm just going to sort of skim over that are about two different Supreme Court decisions. Okay, so the first thing that the Supreme Court did was, this is highlights of the Supreme Court ruling on transgender care for minors. And so this decision was about a Tennessee law which restricted transgender medication, transgender treatment for minors. I'm not sure about the specifics of it, but I'm pretty sure it's just a general ban. But either way, the Supreme Court basically came to the conclusion that it's up to people, up to the states. It's a sort of experimental procedure. It's an experimental thing. We're not sure if we want to, as the Supreme Court, Mr. Samuel Alito didn't want to sign off on any type of things that he thought might have been culturally infective or dangerous. The exact statement doesn't really matter. It's about what you'd expect from someone who would rule against transgender treatment for youths. But this is the first big one that I could think of when I was looking. I'm sure there are a few that went through the cracks too. And another one is the Supreme Court ruling regarding the Maryland school book ban. This one is titled Supreme Court Says Maryland Students Can Pull Their Kids from Public School Lessons Using LGBTQ Books. So this one was about a situation where basically like a bunch of parents in the school district like figured out our kid doesn't have to take part in any like social learning activities that involve like LGBTQ people or books that we're uncomfortable with, and we're just going to say we want a religious exemption from this lesson. The school allowed it at first. They eventually were like, well, this is just disruptive now because so many people are just trying to get out of lessons by saying religious exemptions, and we're really only going to do it for sex ed. So it goes up to the Supreme Court, and Alito said the lack of an opt-out for these classes places an unconstitutional burden on the parents' right to the free exercise of their religion. And so basically they want to enforce this opt-out. And this is another one of those things where it's not like they're banning gay people. What they're doing is they're trying to create a environment where the school's unwilling to produce lessons that half the people are going to opt out of, therefore chilling the speech of like pro-LGBTQ discussion in schools in general, you know, because the school's not going to pay for lesson plans that are going to just get thrown in the trash or ignored by half the people anyway. So sort of like, you know, I would strongly oppose either one of those decisions, but like they're sort of like, it's gray areas for a lot of people, even if I disagree with them. So, but the level of extremism is sort of mounting in these decisions. And so I do want to talk about a future decision they could be making, and seeing the pattern with this, we can sort of infer what they might choose here. So this last article is Supreme Court could legalize LGBTQ conversions therapy. The consequence could cost billions. So the Supreme Court announced Monday, March 7th, that it will hear a case regarding whether state bans on conversion therapy trying to change minors' sexual orientation or sexual or gender identity are legal. A case that could carry billions of dollars in repercussions, as a 2022 study found conversion therapy carries an economic burden of approximately $9 billion annually for patients and their families. So this is a case brought by a licensed counselor who is basically saying she should be allowed to use conversion therapy in her counseling sessions, and that if she's not allowed to, then that's a First Amendment issue. So we could see that they're really leaning on the First Amendment for this, and you know, there's a good chance that this will probably get held up, which would get rid of a ban in my state of Colorado on conversion therapy. Now, it talks a little bit more about conversion therapy, but one stat that I found pretty alarming is that, where is it? It's the percentage of LGBTQ kids who are pressured into conversion therapy. 13%. 13% of LGBTQ youth being subjected to or threatened with conversion therapy. So, like, we could already see what they're trying to brew up here is this really strong reaction from the LGBTQ community. They're basically trying to, like, say without saying it, your option now is to kill yourself. You know, we're not going to allow you in public spaces. We're not going to allow you in public society, and we're going to pull back these laws until it's unlivable for you. Now, their ideal situation is, of course, one that we don't want, and it's not like likely to happen. You know, they have 4 years, they have a dying king, you know, this isn't the vibrant type of movement that they would have wanted. You know, it's on this sort of like unstable ground, and they're doing a lot of unpopular things, but this is looking like the next move, and it's probably going to be heard in it's going to start being heard in October. So What do you have?
I want to start with something you said as the bright side, right? Like this will definitely. But okay, so we're talking about a very specific subset of all the things that changed recently, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot
We're
of things that
narrowing our
happened.
scope.
Yeah, but as like you mentioned, this is getting a lot of people really awake about, wow, this has been happening under the hood all this time, but we just weren't aware of it. And the Supreme Court is exactly that, right? During the first Trump presidency with Supreme Justice Kavanaugh, we got to learn that, like, oh wait, this like whole Supreme Court thing is not as infallible as we once thought it would be. And oh wait, like the Biden could just add more seats if he wanted to? Oh, okay. And so now all these things that we thought were like absolute and fixed, standards of everything, it turns out like, well, wait, aren't we supposed to have checks and balances? Isn't that what what we learned in civics? But then turns out when everybody's on the same side, kind of dissolves the need for motivation for the checks and balances. And we are coming to realize, oh wait, if nothing is enforced, I can kind of do whatever I want, right? And I think this is the natural climax of the American ideal, which is freedom. Because I can. And there is so much emphasis on the American psyche around because I can. The side effect of that is anytime you have to change your ways, it's a personal attack on my freedom.
Right.
Like our pursuit for the ultimate individual freedom has warped our perspective into anything that I want to do, I have the freedom to do, and any kind of a restriction or any kind of a thing where I can't do what I want to do is like, it's a personal attack on my freedom.
It's more unethical than the act that I want to do.
Yeah. So I think that is like, that mindset amplified over a community over time is kind of what's happening today in the world. Like, well, in America, right? But like you said, and like we discussed before, it always comes in a call and response, right? But if we don't stop to look at the cycle of this, we're building up to the next, I don't know who the next person is going to be, but we're building up to the next cultish person influencing everything. And then again, we're going to have a resistance to it, and then back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I want to talk, so since we, discussed all the articles, right?
Yeah.
I want to really talk a little bit about why it's so hard to break out of this loop. And why it's so hard to break out of this loop at the community level, at the national level, is not all that different from why it's so difficult to break out of this at the individual level. And it's because, like I said, when you try to come to an agreement with a person, we tend to think of it in terms of a loss aversion. So what I mean is this. Suppose you and I want to collaborate on something, right? Like this podcast. But suppose we got massively successful and there's a lot of money at stake. Now, the very natural human response to this is like, wait, do I even need Malachi? Why don't I just do this and then just take 100% of the profits? But then again, so this is very natural for you to think, do I even need Billy for this? Like, why wouldn't I just cut Billy out of the picture and just take 100% of the profit? Okay, the thing is, what makes this work is our collaboration, right? But if we are consumed by my 100%, all I can see when I look at your face is a 50% loss. And that makes me not want to do anything with you, because all you remind me is like how much I'm missing out on. So this is looking at the same, glass half full, half empty kind of a thing, right? Like, we're not seeing the fact that we can achieve great things together. We're only looking at what we can do. So, okay, my personal capacity at its maximum is like 100. Same for you too, right? Your personal maximum capacity is 100. Okay, when we combine, this is like the basic foundations of a society, right? It turns out when we combined, we can put it into 200, right? Like, it's the classic story about a guy who can't walk and a blind guy. Oh, why don't I carry you around so you can tell me where to go, right? So that's the power of a society. But then once individual interests start entering into the picture, and more importantly, once loss aversion kicks in, all I can think about is how I can't have what's mine. So, speaking from my culture's experience, Japan colonized Korea. And then, boom, stuff happened. Japan moved out. But during the imperial times, there were a lot of people who kind of worked for the Japanese. Why? Because you gotta live, right? And turns out siding with the powerful people makes it easy for you to live.
Right.
And both the North and the South Korean governments purged the sympathizers, Japanese sympathizers, right? And this is intergenerational. So, your grandpa sided with the Japanese in North Korea. You can never enter the party. Why? Because you're 4 generations up, 5 generations up, your ancestors were Japanese sympathizers, so you can never enter the party. And in North Korea, party is a pretty big thing, right?
Right.
And in South Korea, basically, like a lot of massacres, political massacres. So this tendency to erase everything is what makes it so extreme. But then why can't we have some Japanese sympathizers continue to run the government? Because they clearly have the experience, right? They know what running Korea is like because they sided with the Japanese. So why don't we use their expertise? This thought doesn't even cross your mind. Because what the fuck are you talking about? These guys sold the nation, right? And this kind of unwillingness to compromise, we have to understand, it's very understandable. Because it's so personal. But recently, I learned of some Sri Lankan peace efforts, because Sri Lanka had experienced a long civil war, and I learned about the organization. I think that organization is called Dharma Shakti, and it's an organization of different religions of Sri Lanka coming together. And what they did was, when a region that was conquered was reclaimed, instead of letting the reclaimed forces take over everything, the religious leaders sat down with the opposing forces and gave some positions so that it remains by the people who used to be in control. So of course, at first, right, both sides vehemently opposed this idea. But this is the power of religious leaders, right? They come and facilitate this conversation so that, hey, what's realistically going to happen if you just take over? You're going to kill all these people, right? So you're just going to continue the civil war? You don't want peace? Do you want to live in war? And then these kind of reckoning experiences bridge that gap. And these are like actual case studies, and I learned a lot from them, right? And my Buddhist order runs a school in India. But this school, right? This school is in a region where it's for the extra caste. You know how India has a caste system?
Yeah.
So there are some people who are outside of the system because they're so low. And because of that, the government doesn't provide school for them. So our Buddhist order, we made the school so that we can educate those kids. But now, interesting things started happening. Because the school was good, other castes wanted to join the school. But they didn't want a high caste teacher. Why? Because high caste teacher can't be interacting with low students. So they also don't want low caste teachers, because why? High caste students shouldn't be learning from low caste, right? So our organization had a sit down with everyone, right? Do you want to run an Indian school or do you want to run a Korean school? And everybody wants a Korean school because the quality of education is great, right? So if you want a Korean school, we can't respect all of your individual wishes that are very justified in your own, mind.
Right.
But this is a school that we're going to run the Korean way. Are you okay with that, or do you want to not have education at all? And then so the people begrudgingly agreed on the Korean style where all the students are equal, right? But turns out children are kind of impressionable. So when everybody was treated equally, the children started to learn that, oh, wait, there's nothing really separating me from these kids. And then they go back home, and then they carry this influence of unity with them, right? So our school's been running for 30 plus years. And that region has changed a lot because the kids who grew up from that school are now adults and have their children. And in that region, there is a very distinct, harmonious society, regardless of caste. But again, coming back to America, right? We can continue teeter-tottering between progressive and conservative. And sometimes, I don't know, we may have a moderate, right? But this is the hard part for us. We have to kind of accept that maybe some of these policies are required for harmony, for the sake of harmony. And again, this is the hard part for us because for us, it's so personal, right? But we have to remember that for the other guys, this issue is as personal to them as it is to us. So as much as it is ridiculous for us to be discussing conversion therapy in 2025, as ridiculous as it is that we are discussing, banning, taking kids out of, books, as ridiculous as it is for us to be discussing children and teenagers not getting care, to them, it is that ridiculous that trans kids are. To them, it is that ridiculous that kids are influenced by these LGBTQ doctrines and ideologies. To them, it is that detrimental. So, do we want to continue to teeter-totter between 100 and 0, 100 and 0, 100 and 0, 100 and 0, while causing a lot of damage every overturn? Or do we want to sit down and think of a way to compromise? Yeah, when I'm begrudgingly coming to the table, it's a compromise. But what if I came willingly to the table? Then it's a resolution. Then it's an agreement. We need to learn at the individual level how to come to agreement with other people, even if it may come at a little bit of a cost of an individual bad. Because harmony is so much more, practically beneficial than being John Denver. I don't know, is it John Denver? John Wayne. John Wayne's the person I'm looking. Than being the John Wayne, always, by yourself. And it's, I blabbered on for a little bit, but the last thing that I want to mention is our ideals, the things that we want out of our life, our society, the world. We have to understand that it's endless. Our pursuit for pleasure, our pursuit for more, our pursuit for the next better thing. We have to understand that by the design of our mind, it's designed to be endless. We have to be able to put a temper on it with the realistic expectation that, hey, I could go on more, but there is no end to this. So I need to be able to decide what's a reasonable amount of satisfaction for me at a certain level. Because America, things that happen in America isn't necessarily only about America. It impacts the entire world.
Right.
The decisions that we make and the actions that we take cause a lot of changes in our natural world. And it causes environmental changes, whether it's a catastrophic one or not, it causes changes. And if we want to be the responsible order makers of the world, because people generally agree, regardless of what side you lean, it's good to be a citizen of the most powerful country in the world, right? But if we really want that, we have to start thinking about curbing our desires. Because because the things that we are experiencing right now is a direct result of uncapped desires.
Right. And I think I completely agree with all that. I think there are definitely things that get in the way of a type of reconciliation. Mostly being the fact that there are agents who are intentionally lying to people and spreading misinformation. And I think everybody works reasonably within their incentives, but when you believe in a bunch of things that aren't true, then your incentives become mismatched with reality, and it's an easy way to hurt people, especially when you're trying to create laws like federal laws and stuff like that. And I think your note is a good one to end it on. And I think the when we're dealing with people like Trump, who's violent and wants 100%, we have to be willing to stand here and be willing to reconcile when that's over. When they lose, when they fail to reach their goals, we need to be willing to come to the table instead of continuing a fight, And I think that is true. And I think people have tried it to varying degrees of success, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be attempted every time, One last thing I am going to mention is the Trevor Project. They're the one of the big orgs that were taking care of the calls to 988, basically stripped $30 million of funding from them. So I'm asking any viewers to donate to the Trevor Project if they can. If you know anybody who is LGBTQ in your life, make sure they are aware of the Trevor Project. I don't want any LGBTQ people calling that 988 number. There's no telling what kind of shit is going to come through there. Call directly to the Trevor Project. Donate to the Trevor Project if you aren't calling to it. All of that. I think it's really important. I think that they're saving lives right now. So, and you said what's the name of your the one you work with in Hawaii?
Spill the Tea Cafe.
Spill the Tea Cafe. So I'm going to include both links to those in the description. And yeah, it was a great talk. I'm gonna
Yeah,
chat
as
with you
always, thank you so much for having me again.
yeah, I'm gonna chat with you for just a moment, but I'm gonna wave to the audience.